So, social engineering. To those that believe in free will, this seems like the most damning thing ever. But when we look around at the people we see, especially when they're not themselves, when they're drunk, when they're high, and they're doing things that they normally wouldn't do, and they're using the drugs and alcohol to justify what they're doing. Imagine if we didn't have social engineering. So, what causes social engineering? Well, our history, for one, and if things are taken out of or put into history, then that is social engineering. We're programmed to create a reality that makes sense to us, or at least we try to. And now so many people go back and forth on so many things that it often makes it confusing when you're not able to reflect on it yourself. If you believe that it's something way beyond you, then why are you going to waste the time and thought to figure out something that you're just going to hit a dead end anyway, right? So when we make people feel that those dead ends are there, but they're really not, that is also social engineering. Like laws that were made 100 years ago, and people are like, well, we don't even know why that law exists, but we still have to follow it. Even though it's the only state, the only place in the world that has that law. But the thing is, it's a law. That's social engineering. But a lot of it is useful because it diminishes a lot of justifications where a lot of people will do it for dopamine, and they're looked at as selfish, but some people are selfish. Some people are, lack the ability to see, the psychological benefits to human beings. They only see opportunity. That's a psychopath. So we can't really be socially engineered by them if you are not a psychopath. I mean, you can become a sociopath through trauma and, the inability to control yourself, or, something like that. Over time, it would program you to say, hey, all these times I cared, and not one time did anybody even acknowledge me. They only looked at me when I did the bad things. When I was getting my dopamine and I got too carried away, that's when people noticed. When I started making it about my opinion, that's when people noticed, because then all they wanted to do was argue. This is all social engineering. We do it to ourselves. Social engineering is literally just not replacing, but building, replacing, painting over people's realities. So, and then when you have people that aren't aware, well, that lack of awareness becomes a biological weakness where this person tries to figure out, why is this happening? They're going to reach a dead end. So this is literally all social engineering. We are social engineers, and we are built to be socially engineered. That's why we have mirror neurons, because in order for us to survive, we have to make sense of not where we're going, but that we are moving, that we are progressing. So the way to kind of battle social engineering in your own head is literally just to see the benefit in moving, rather than hoping somebody else is going to notice you. So social engineering is basically psychology. It's not that you're being engineered for all bad. It's that without that social engineering, you would have absolutely no path. Imagine if there were still no colleges, still no, manufacturing businesses. What path would you take? Well, you might have a cabin in the woods, and have your wife and kids, and maybe some of your kids died because there was no medical around when she was delivering, so complications happened, maybe even your wife died. So these types of trauma, especially when they're all dealt with alone, causes a resistance to social engineering. And that's why social engineering took so long over time, was because these people, that if you went back and met these people, you would not like them at all, because they would not have shown much empathy. They were more worried about complications from environment, disease, literally everything. So social engineering, before it actually existed, it was pretty much everybody was on their own. It wasn't just about being selfish. It was about survival and not being programmed to be a societal tool, which, when it all comes down to it, it's all about survival, right? Everything in this world is about survival, but when we paint over it, we stop seeing so much survival and start seeing the social engineering that was actually built on top of survival. Survival was the foundational block of everything in this universe. And so when we realized that you couldn't just tell people what to do, you had to convince them over generations that what we're doing is a lot better than what it could be. Still having wars everywhere. I'm talking, people coming up missing and not even being noticed because nobody even knew they existed. So to say that social engineering is always a bad thing is, it's not right. It's the awareness that allows us to see what's actually happening. So when we don't want to face our own shadow, which is understandable, when all you're going to do is hit dead ends because you're not aware of what that, what is you and what is your shadow. And I'm talking you know what I mean. So your shadow doesn't want to be stomped on. Your shadow feels disrespected by the other part of you for not defending both of you. It's kind of like two pilots in the same jet with joysticks and all that, and one's trying to go one way, the other one's trying to go the other way. So what happens? You got a wall coming up, and these two people are trying to pull both ways. Crash. So by giving one person controls, you are creating a type of social engineering, because that person in the back is trusting that person in the front that they're not going to hit walls. They're not going to say, okay, we're just giving up. Let's just ditch this and say screw it. So social engineering, without it, we wouldn't have had the knowledge, and people wouldn't be as accepting of the knowledge that does make sense. They would have only stuck to what they believed made sense. So the transition between what we think and actual knowledge, the social engineering is put in the middle of that. It's like a lens. It's not always that you're trying to dumb people down, but rather you're trying to make these people understand, okay, this is why we do this. I don't know if that last part made sense. I really don't care.